Well, thank you, Donald. And, of course, Donald Trump gave a big speech on international jihadi terrorism and what to do about it in Riyadh just the other day. And later on in the show this evening, we will have the Deputy Assistant to President Trump, Sebastian Gorka, on the show to talk about what they're trying to do in America to tackle terrorism and what they think across the world we should be doing. We in fact broadcast last night's show from Manchester, and we hadn't left very long when these news reports started to filter through. The fact that 22 people have been killed, including children as young as the age of 8, is something that I think is truly shocking. It's been condemned, of course, by all political leaders and by all religious leaders. I have to say, for my own part, I think perhaps we've reached a new low. The targeting of young girls at a concert just seems to be about as low as you could possibly sink. And I know that a lot of people are very, very upset and shocked. I also know a lot of people are really very angry. But we have been here before, haven't we? We've had these twin emotions of shock and anger, and we get the statements from our leaders. But I wonder whether perhaps a mood that is beginning to creep through today, and we'll see more of in the next few days, is, and the question I want to ask you tonight is, what do you want the government's response to be? You know, if you were sat right now in the Cobra meeting, what would you be urging Mrs May to do? Now, there's been a vigil held in Manchester this evening. It started at 6 o'clock. It's just finished, I think. And let's go over to LBC's reporter in Manchester, Rachel Venables. Rachel, good evening.
Good evening. Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there when you've described the shock and the anger that many people, if not every person I've spoken to here in Manchester today, has been telling me they feel, particularly because we know that it was a pop concert that was targeted. It would have been filled with screaming, happy, dancing children. Some of them left early as Ariana Grande came back on for an encore, and that's when the bomb went off in the foyer. People who were there described being blasted to the ground, nuts and bolts flying everywhere, people covered in blood, and as we now know, 22 people were killed and 59 injured, including 18-year-old Georgina Calendar and Sadie Russo, who was just 8 years old. And throughout today, we've been hearing appeals, hearing from desperate parents and loved ones. I've been speaking to some myself, looking for their family, looking for the loved one who they waved off to go to a concert and who didn't contact them, didn't text them to say I'm safe after that bomb went off. And that's really been the focus of the people here in Manchester today, moving beyond this, coming together as a community, and the vigil certainly aimed to do that. It celebrated Manchester, particularly with a poem as well by Tony Walsh, which celebrated the suffragettes making tea and just northern grit, which had huge cheers from the crowd here, despite what's been a really sad 24 hours. Yeah, there was lots of talk, Rachel, wasn't there, of sort of taxi drivers in Manchester, and even some coming from Liverpool to help ferry people around because the train service had closed. And there's been a lot has been said about the spirit of Manchester in dealing with this. But can you tell us what the latest statements from the police are? Well, the latest statements from the police have covered a number of things. First of all, passing their condolences on to the families, as we will always hear in these situations. Only a handful of those killed have been named, so we'll be hearing more from the police over the next few days on that. They also discussed 2 warrants which they carried out today, one in Whaley Range and one in Fallowfield as well, which saw a controlled explosion happening earlier today. A 23-year-old man was also arrested in connection with the attack, and police have also confirmed in the last few hours as well that the man suspected of carrying out the atrocity, in their words, has been named as 22-year-old Salman Abedi. Now, he's thought to have been born in the UK with Libyan origin, and it's thought that he died in the attack last night. He hasn't been officially named, but that's certainly the word coming from the police.
Yes, and so we don't know, as I understand it, whether this man was known to the police previously or not. Reports that I've read seem to vary on this.
That's very true. Reports have varied on that. Some people saying that he was known to the police, others being less sure. As always happens in a situation like this, police are very cagey. What we do know is that they said they knew the suspect's identity, or they said they thought they knew the suspect's identity pretty early on, and it took quite a few hours before they revealed that, partially because in that time that's when they carried out these 2 searches at these 2 addresses in Manchester. So they keep their cards very close to their chest, as you can understand, because they want to speak to friends, they want to speak to family. They don't want to give everything away.
Yeah. Rachel, thank you very much indeed. If any news breaks, please do come back to us. Meanwhile, that's been happening in Manchester, the vigil, which has just ended. In London, the Prime Minister is chairing a meeting of Cobra, and I've got with me Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. He's down in Westminster. What can you tell us, Theo?
I'm looking at a screen of number 10 Downing Street here in our Westminster studio, Nigel, and I've yet to see Theresa May walk through that door into committee briefing room A to chair the second meeting of Cobra, the government's emergencies committee. At that meeting will be the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, as well as police chiefs. We can also expect the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, and Michael Fallon to be there as well. And they will be discussing not just the police's response in Greater Manchester, but also, I'd imagine, the threat level as well. Currently it's at severe. Will they decide to raise it to critical? And then there are, Nigel, a series of high-profile sporting events here in London, namely the FA Cup final this weekend, and what measures can be put in place to assure visitors to those events that they're safe. We're talking about more armed police on the streets, and that's the initial response, but will anything else be expected as well?
I mean, in fact, we've been on severe, haven't we, now since 2014. So this is sort of perpetual state of fear, it would seem the government is under. Can you just briefly explain to the listeners what Cobra exactly is?
It's a meeting room. It's a meeting room, but it's where they convene all the top level intelligence people from MI5, MI6, GCHQ, as well as officials that might have a specific interest. So, for instance, when we had that hacking case into the NHS, that involved NHS officials. Now, clearly, in this case, as far as Department of Health officials will be concerned, that won't be necessary. Although I'm sure there'll be some advice as to the exact situation at those 8 Manchester hospitals. But you get the picture. People are brought in according to the expertise that are needed for a particular emergency. And obviously now the focus is on trying to find out who this man's associates are, who his friends are, where he may have got the materials for this explosive device from. This is, Nigel, different to the Westminster Bridge attack. It is different to the murder of Lee Rigby 4 years ago because it did involve a degree of planning. We're talking about reconnaissance. We're talking about finding those materials for that explosive device, and it will have required some support. And when you look at the types of raids being carried out by Greater Manchester Police, the specialist officers involved, the types of tactics used, they were going after particular individuals. They were not just pulling in associates, friends, relatives for questioning. They were pulling in people for interrogation. They need to get to the bottom of who may have helped this man so they can be brought to justice.
I'm sure I speak for everybody listening to say let's hope they do. And just briefly, Theo, what are the implications? I mean, there's never been, as I understand it, a terrorist attack that has taken place during a general election campaign. We had the murder of Joe Cox that took place in the referendum last year, but this has never happened before in a general election. How long do you think campaigning is going to be suspended for?
You're quite right to mention that's true. I think what we're going to see, and it was mentioned today that there'd be a suspension. It was said today there'd be a suspension of national campaigns. So Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, Paul Nuttall and Tim Farron will lay off the campaigning at a national level for the time being. I think tomorrow we'll start to see a bit of local campaigning, the delivering of leaflets, knocking of doors by a few candidates, and of course the main party leaders hadn't ruled that out. Friday is the day when we're expecting it to be stepped up again. But of course, Theresa May and the Conservative campaign has been very much about her personally.
Yes.
Is going to be in Brussels for NATO and then Sicily for the G7. And so she won't really be taking part in campaigning properly until Sunday. And we know that in actual fact, the Conservative leader doesn't really like to campaign on Sunday. So in many ways, it could be that we don't really see a proper resumption of the campaign until Monday.
Yeah. Theo, thank you ever so much indeed. Well, imagine that you're there at that Cobra meeting, which hasn't actually started, was supposed to start, but is about to start. Imagine you're going into that meeting. what do you want the government's response to be? What would you say to Theresa May needs to be done? Let me know. Call me on 0345 6060 973. You can text me on 84850. You can tweet me on @LBC using the hashtag Farage and LBC. You can watch us and comment, of course, on LBC's Facebook page too. And I'm going to go first to Emma in Ealing. Emma, what do you think the government should do?
Hi, Nigel. Well, quite frankly, I want the government to clamp down on what's going on in the UK. First of all, I'd like to say that I integrate and I work with a lot of Muslims. I'm a teacher.
Yes.
And yes, of course, there's lots of lovely Muslims out there. They're wonderful people, fabulous. And they're not all terrorists. I don't think that at all. And they're not all extremists. However, I've watched many programs now there was one particular one that's really shocked me because I only watched it a couple of weeks ago, but it was aired apparently a couple of years ago on do you know Stacey Dooley? She did a documentary about her hometown, which is Luton.
Oh, that's right.
And she was there attending a march by Muslim people who were protesting about a woman who had been arrested. I'm not quite sure of the details of the arrest. And there were hundreds and hundreds of these Muslim people, and they were all attacking Stacey Dooley, saying that she was a disgrace for wearing this lovely long dress that she had on because she looked naked to them, and they were absolutely inciting hatred against British people.
So why would people living in, what would have driven them, if what you say is absolutely true, what would have driven them to incite hatred? What's going wrong?
I don't know. I really don't know. It saddens me greatly. I know there's some people who would want to live here peacefully, but I don't know. But they've obviously come from countries that they're trying to get away from, so I would have thought they want to come here and live here and bring their children up in a very peaceful and wonderful environment. I mean, I think the UK for me is a wonderful country. We're incredibly tolerant.
Yeah, we have been, certainly.
I can't understand why these people can't embrace that. And, they don't embrace that. They do not integrate. There's so many things we need to do. On that video, every female Muslim was completely covered up. You could not see her face. That is frightening for me.
Would that be your number one thing that needs to be changed, Emma?
Absolutely. Ban the veil. I'd even go further than that. I would ban the headscarf for children under the age of 18. Because I think it's actually quite an awful thing to see. I see little kids in school, aged 5 and 6, wearing a headscarf. I kind of find it quite cruel.
Emma, you've made your point very clearly. Emma wants a ban on the veil, on the headscarf for children. If you disagree, get involved, let us know. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. The country is a sadder place today without any shadow of a doubt. The murder of 22 people, including children as young as the age of 8, has shocked people, horrified people, saddened people, and angered people too. But we've heard before our leaders telling us that they'll stand firm and they'll be resolute. But I'm asking you tonight, what do you want the government's response to be? What do you want them to actually do? If you were there at that Cobra meeting tonight with the Prime Minister, what would you be urging her to do? Edward in Northampton, put yourself in that room. What's the one thing you think needs to be done?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
It's the first time I've ever spoken to you.
Well, welcome. Welcome, but sadly on this very, very macabre subject of what happened last night.
Yes, it is. I think they should seriously bring back in a big way stop and search.
Yes.
Definitely. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that when we had it, which it was only a few ethnic minorities that complained about it, I'd have no problem being searched any time of the day or night, Nigel. No problem at all.
But if you're dealing, Edward, with something like knife crime in London, which apparently is at epidemic levels in some boroughs, so there are hundreds of people carrying illegal knives, I can see in that case why stop and search would find a lot of people with knives.
Yes.
But if you're dealing with one suicide bomber in a city the size of Manchester, is stop and search really? I mean, you really would be then, I think, would you not, looking for the needle in the haystack?
Well, yes, and what I've heard today from reports on LBC, these people started queuing about 6 o'clock to go into a concert at 7:30. I mean, I would make sure that everyone's bag and everyone was searched going through those turnstiles.
Well, I think, Edward,
take 6 or 8 hours, Nigel.
Yeah, no. I think, Edward, to be fair to the venue, the reports that I read is there was security for people going into the building, and their bags were searched. The problem is what happens outside, and this is exactly the same thing the authorities in Brussels came up with. That once you've gone through airport security, you've been metal checked, bag checked, patted down, asked to half undress and all the rest of it. But as you actually arrive at Brussels airport and drop people off, it is effectively a public space. And the problem with what happened last night was it happened in what was a public space. So, I'm not pretending for one moment that dealing with this is easy. No. But what worries me, Edward, is why and where are people being radicalised? That's the bit that really gets me.
I heard today again on the news that trying to get into Windsor Castle, you're searched before you even get anywhere near the grounds.
Yeah, well, we may, Edward, we may be heading towards that. The danger is that in fact all we do is push the problem to another place. Edward, you've made the point. The police need more powers. They need to stop and search people and not be worried about being criticised for profiling by religion or age or sex or race or anything else. Edward, I thank you very much for your call. Brad in Stoke-on-Trent, what's the one thing you think needs to be done?
Hi, Nigel. Thank you for talking to me. I think there's a real problem. I think what we've got is we've got people being radicalised on things such as social media. You've got young people that don't feel part of society and feel segregated and feel like they don't belong to anything, and that's why it's so easy for them to get radicalised through social media and websites. It's easy to go on and do a Google search and watch a few propaganda videos and end up with all these crazy ideas of going and doing these things. What is the one thing that we need to do? I don't think it's as simple as putting it down to one thing, if I'm honest with you.
No, I didn't say it was, Brad. I said, what's the one thing you would suggest? That was all.
Sorry. Yeah, I think the thing is, Nigel, is the one thing that I think that we need to do is we need to be a bit more close circuit. Like, this person was on the watch list. Now, I imagine that there's thousands and thousands of people on the watch list, but why are they getting forgotten about? Why is nothing being done about that? These people need to be monitored. We need to have people monitoring these people so that they are not able to sort this. But the problem is there's a lot of terrorists that are already over here in the UK. I remember when the refugee crisis was happening, and potentially sort of still is, when the refugee crisis was happening, ISIS said themselves, we're going to send fighters onto boats. There was people throwing the passports in the sea, saying, yeah, I'm a refugee. At the end of the day, the problem is that they've already been integrated into our society, and they're now being spread out across the country. And what we can't do anything about it. We're going to struggle so much to do anything about it whatsoever. And it's hard, because as I say, these people who got killed were innocent young people.
Of course,
and that is the type of people that they target. They target the innocent.
So the internet, though, you think is potentially a really, really dangerous problem in all of this?
It's a breeding ground. It is a breeding ground. It's so easy to go into a Google search and find any ISIS propaganda, anything like that.
So should we, Brad? I'm just going to ask you this very simple question: should the government be, to whatever extent it can, somehow regulating the internet?
I would like to see that done, and I don't know how it would be done. But to be fair, there needs to be something more. There needs to be something more done. It's easy, These people are getting these ideas from
the internet. Brad, thank you. You've made your point beautifully and clearly. And I get on text, this cobra should change its name to Bambi because it does nothing. And if they don't this time, then we the people will have to, says Steve from Sutton. You cannot expect security services to catch everyone, but staffing needs to be reviewed and, if requested, increased. But mindful that our lives cannot change, says Cindy. Cindy, I have a feeling that our lives in many ways have changed already. Just catch an aeroplane flight and you realise that our lives have changed as a result of the threat. And here's the one that I was expecting and I've been seeing today. The government needs to round up and isolate the 3,500 jihadis that were allowed back into the country. Well, I don't think 3,500 jihadis were allowed back into the country. I understand the number is estimated to be between 500 and 1,000 people, British passport holders, who've left these shores and gone to fight for ISIS in Syria and then come back into the country. And yes, they are dangerous people. They've been brutalised and they've learnt to make bombs and to do all sorts of things. And I would love to think we could stop any of them coming back into our country and, frankly, in my view, take their passports away. But the 3,500 number, it's 3,500 suspected jihadi terrorists that are living in the United Kingdom. And there is a question here. Do the security services have sufficient resources to monitor 3,500 people? And I've seen even quite well-known national newspaper commentators today suggesting that we should round up the 3,500, a sort of, I don't know, what would it be, a British Guantanamo Bay or whatever it is. I have a feeling that that won't happen. I think it probably in any country in the European time zone perhaps has too much of the shades of the 1930s about it. But make no mistake, listeners, there are quite a lot of people out there today suggesting that's what we need to do. I'm going to ask Darren in Barnsley. Darren, good evening. What on earth do we need to do? What do we need to do, Darren? What would you do? What would you tell the Prime Minister, Darren?
I've just sat and listened to your callers and what you've just said.
Yep.
And you've basically taken words out of my mouth, if I'm quite honest.
That's all right. That's all right.
This is thing. You could do a Trump thing and ban all Muslims coming into the country, but then you've got to.
Well, Trump, to be fair, wasn't actually doing that. But
you've got the problem. You've got the problem. See, the thing is, you've got Muslims, and then you've got people who are extremists, and that is the issue. You've got the issue. The issue is you've already got the extremists here. Muslims is probably the wrong word to say, but somebody needs to stand up and tackle the problem within. So firstly, what I do is anybody with terrorist links or known terrorists, that is the words what I can't comprehend. When something like this happens and then somebody turns around and it comes on radio, comes on news that there were known terrorists. They were known. So why on earth has this been allowed to happen? So what needs to happen is, number one, if you've links, or if you've been to Syria and you've come back and they've got an idea, they need to do exactly what you've just said.
So somebody, if somebody, Darren, living in a community not too far from you, had been out to Syria and come back, do you think their own parents or their own brothers and sisters should report them to the authorities?
Well, that depends, because if they've got family in Syria, it's like anything. You can lock paedophiles up, can't you? If somebody's looking at wrong things on the internet, they know somehow. So if somebody's looking at, it's like grooming, isn't it? You get the kids. So if you ban Muslims coming in, you try and stop the Islamists.
And the other problem, Darren, is there are 3 million people of Muslim faith living in this country. If we were seen to act in too heavy-handed way, or if we were seen to presume people were guilty before we thought they were innocent, we might actually radicalise even more people, Darren.
Exactly. And I think the only party is the Muslims themselves.
They need to sort it out. Darren, you've made the point beautifully. I thank you. In a moment, we're going to have Sebastian Gorka straight from the White House talking to us about Trump's speech, talking to us about Trump and the White House's plan for us all across the world, including Muslim states, needing to work together to deal with this evil. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30. Well, in the wake of the horror in Manchester last night, there's been condemnation of what happened, not just from British political leaders, but also from leaders all around the world. And this is what President Trump had to say.
I won't call them monsters because they would like that term. I will call them from now on losers, because that's what they are. They're losers.
I like that phrase, losers. Well, I'm pleased to say that joining me now, I've got Seb Gorka. He is the Deputy Assistant to President Trump. He's also the author of a book called Defeating Jihad, The Winnable War. And I have a signed copy of that book, Seb, and it filled me with some optimism, I have to say, that things can be done. Welcome, Seb, to the programme.
Thank you. That was the point of the book. We defeated the West. Britain, America defeated the Nazis. We defeated the Soviet Union. We are facing totalitarians again. This time it's global jihadists, and together we will defeat them as well.
Well, I think that's the message that the people of this country need to hear today. I was very interested that shortly after we heard that this bomb had gone off in Manchester last night, but without knowing who the perpetrator was, you put out on Twitter that the Manchester explosion happens on the 4th anniversary of the murder of Fusilier Lee Rigby. Dates matter to jihadi terrorists. Can you just explain that to us, please?
Yeah, so terrorism in general, but specifically jihadi terrorism, isn't just about death, destruction, and murder. It's about symbolism. Look at 9/11. Look at the event that happened yesterday. Look at the symbolism. September 11th was a very important date in Islamic history. Yesterday was the 4th anniversary of the brutal murder of Fusilier Rigby. And that's not a coincidence. These things matter. They take a lot of planning. 9/11 took years of planning. Yesterday's attack probably took at least months of planning. And they pick these days specifically to send their message of fear. But as the president said yesterday, we don't call them monsters because we're not afraid of them.
Yes.
These are losers, and we will crush them, Nigel.
I thought that was a really clever word the president used because, as I understand it, the people that commit these barbarous acts believe it makes them great people and they'll be immortalised in history. So I guess that's why Trump used that word loser, yeah?
Yeah, because, a monster is something you're afraid of. A monster is powerful.
Yes.
These people aren't powerful. Killing 8-year-old girls, children at a concert, they're cowards, and they should be called out for being losers. They're part of a losing death cult that we will annihilate, thanks to, the leadership that we're seeing coming out of both the UK and the United States.
Well, I have to say, talking of leadership, I did think that Trump's speech that he gave in Riyadh the other day was extraordinary. And in particular, the phrase that he used when he said to these leaders, drive them out, drive the extremists out of your places of worship. Do you think that the Trump visit, that Trump saying, look, I'm not against all of you, whatever was said in the campaign was said, I want to work with you, I want to beat the bad guys. Do you see any signs of hope coming from this trip, that we can perhaps get some genuine cooperation with parts of the Muslim world to try and beat this evil?
Absolutely, Nigel. So, think about what happened just a few days ago. It truly was a Churchillian moment. So we had the President of the United States stand in front of the leaders of more than 50 Arab and Muslim nations and say, look, you have a problem. You have to clean your house. You have to get the extremists out of your places of worship, out of your communities. And what else did he say? As if we were back, as if it was the battle of the forces arrayed against us, were as if we were back on the beaches of Normandy. What did he say? He said, this is a battle between good and evil. That's the moral clarity that we required in World War II, that we required at the height of the Cold War, and that is the only way we're going to win. And we're seeing amazing things coming out of Egypt and Jordan and hopefully elsewhere that will make victory possible.
So you don't think that there'll be a response from some countries that maybe the US president is interfering a bit too much, is moralising, lecturing a bit too much?
Look, there's so much misconception. I don't even. The president calls it fake news. As the brunt of some of that fake news in the last 17 weeks, I've just come to the conclusion it's propaganda. It's the same with Brexit. The amount of lies that was spun is just, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Well, I won't disagree with you on that point, that's for certain. Can I ask you, Seb, just one last, but perhaps most important question that I want to ask you, and that is that there are people listening to this show tonight who are shocked, horrified, upset, angry, all those mixtures of emotions. And as I'm talking to you, the Prime Minister, is in a secret meeting, in a Cobra meeting, deciding what the next steps are. And I do feel that we've almost had enough of being told after each of these attacks that we condemn what has happened. I think the British people now, and the people across Europe, want some action. If you were in that meeting, what would you advise our Prime Minister to do right away?
Exactly what we've been doing here for the last 4 months, Nigel. First things first, no more political correctness, no more censorship. We talk about the enemy as who they truly are and the ideology that drives them, global jihadism. Second, we empower those people who need to be empowered, especially amongst the Muslim community, especially amongst our Muslim allies, the people who are pushing back already, but who we don't help. Because they're talking about religious themes or because it's not politically correct. And the last thing, this isn't really a war about bombs and bullets. That's part of it. It's about intelligence. Just like with the IRA, we have to find these people before they strap on the vest, before they go kinetic. Then we will win. So reinforcing human intelligence capabilities.
Seb, I can't thank you enough for coming on the programme and for being so positive and uplifting on what is a black day. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we were very fortunate, I think, to get Seb Gorka there, who has studied this subject for years. And so often, when you hear people, when you hear the critical voices, when you hear those that condemn the government and say they've got everything wrong, so often it's a negative message. And what is fascinating about Seb Gorka, and you heard it there, is it's a positive message. He says in the last few months, this is what Trump is doing in America. Now, I don't know whether you agree with those steps or you disagree with those steps, but let me know what you think the Prime Minister should do and what you think of what Team Trump is trying to do on a global scale and whether they've got this right or whether they've got this wrong. The number to call 0345 6060 973, and I'm going to go to Rawa in Hampstead. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, what would you do?
I'm not a fan of Trump at all. I thought his speech was very honest from a Western, politician. Just basically saying, look, our interests, our American interests, obviously, and where those align with yours, let's work together. And it was quite refreshing, and I think it was quite good to hear someone saying, I'm not really interested in regime change. We just don't want Americans to be attacked.
As you were, as a non-Trump fan, did you think there was just something perhaps of the global statesman about him in that speech?
I'm not sure I'm that generous, Nigel.
Okay, all right.
I thought it was very honest, and I think a lot of politicians go around the world talking about how important democracy is while selling lots of arms to Saudi. Yep. And he went there and said, actually, I'm not so bothered about how you run your country, and I'm going to sell all those arms to Saudi. That's a lot more honest.
Yep, no, I get that, absolutely. So put yourself, Rawa, you are now in the meeting with the Prime Minister. What is the one thing you want to see happen?
I think what we're doing isn't working. I don't think the solution is more monitoring, more, crushing down on the Muslim community. I think that for whatever reason, we've got people who are turning out to be mad nutter terrorists, and it is disgusting and it's horrible. This is a British guy. I don't link it with the refugee crisis. He was born here. He's our problem.
Yes, his parents were. His parents were refugees. But yes, he was born here. He was born here, and we think he may have visited Libya. But we basically think he was radicalised here. So we've talked about the internet, but there are other problems too, aren't there, Rawa? I mean, for example, we've seen examples of schools. Where Ofsted has said, look, something's got to stop here. And even prisons, because the guy that drove into those people on Westminster Bridge had been radicalised in a prison in Norfolk. So there is a lot to do, isn't there?
I think the prison system is a big issue. Quite a lot of terrorists across Europe and Britain have been through the prison system. One of the interesting things is our prison system doesn't work. I think the recidivism rates are nearer to 80%. You've got countries like Norway where they're below 10%. And what Norway does differently is the first, I think, after, when you've committed a horrific crime, the first person is the doctor. Now, it's not that you're going to avoid sentencing or avoid jail, but I think the Norwegians understand that there is a vested interest for all of society for people to not come back out with better skills, maybe a bit of jihadism under their belt, and feeling really angry with the system. Prison's expensive, and it's particularly expensive. People are going in and out of it.
Robert,
I think I would look at the Danish models, and I would look at Scandinavian models.
You are very right.
I'm not hug a hoodie, but what we're doing is not working.
You've made a very powerful point. It's not working, and prisons are a real problem, and I thank you for your call. In a minute, we're going to look specifically at radicalisation in prisons with the help of an expert. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45. Whilst we're sad, angry and horrified at what happened in Manchester yesterday, we're trying, in this programme, to find some solutions. We're trying, actually, to find some advice for the Prime Minister? Because I think what people are feeling is that we get the words every time something horrid happens, but what we don't get is enough action. Now, my next guest this evening is Hanif Kadir, who is the CEO of the Active Change Foundation and author of Preventing and Countering Extremism and Terrorist Recruitment. Hanif, good evening to you and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Nigel. Thanks for having me on.
No,
what
not
a
a bit.
Sad day, eh?
Very sad indeed. I say we're sad, but we are trying to be positive. We're trying here not to just throw our arms up in the air and despair. We're trying to look for possible ways forward. I just would like you to tell me very quickly what the Active Change Foundation attempts to do.
We started it off in 2003 to tackle the problem of radicalisation and extremism within our communities. In 2003, when everybody thought I was dreaming and I was imagining things, and look at now, 15 years on, we are still fighting the same problem. So the Active Change Foundation works with young people and communities right across the board.
Yes.
Outreach and engagement, we go right into the communities and we engage with individuals of concern.
Why? I mean, clearly we've got the internet, we've got schools, we've got prisons. I mean, with all these years of experience looking at this, is there any one area in particular that really worries you the most?
Every single area worries me the most, Nigel.
All right.
I mean, we're talking about internet now,
Yep.
but let's go back 10 years. 7/7, they weren't radicalised on the internet. So radicalisation happens in our communities at every level. Institutions are vulnerable to radicalisation. Prisons, we know that is a fact. The problem that we've got here is that there's not enough being done effectively by organisations that are at a grassroots level to tackle the problem. And the reason that is because we are led by a government that's become so risk-averse that if we want to tackle this risky problem, we have to take certain risks. And if organisations like us are not allowed to take those risks, the problem's only going to get worse.
You will obviously have looked at Theresa May, who was Home Secretary for 6 years, and does she understand the depth of this problem? Is she the right person to tackle this?
64 million question, Nigel. How do you want me to answer that? The truth or the alternative fact?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess the truth might be handy.
Absolutely. The truth is, I don't think she does understand the depth of this problem. And I've worked very closely with Theresa May and her team. And my conclusions will remain with me. But I think that, in all honesty, I don't think the whole team fully understand the level and the depth of this problem. If they did, they would allow us to continue at the pace and the level that we have been doing for so long. For nearly 15 years, we were championed by the Home Office. We were doing successful work. But there's a lot of organisations that are out there engaging with communities. Effective outreach is not happening. Effective understanding of the problem and expertise where it's needed is non-existent.
And if you were sitting in that COBRA meeting now, what would you say needs to be done right away?
I would say what I've said before. Let's do what they are doing, tapping into the human resource, and they are changing them to become monsters and losers, like Donald Trump said. Mm-hmm. We can tap into that human resource and turn them into assets. We have to be able to take risks because it's risky business. We can stop this problem. I am confident. I have demonstrated how we can stop this problem. We need to be able to do the work that needs to be done and not be dictated to by central government.
OK, but it's not easy for central government to know who to trust to do this, is it?
Exactly. But then, since 2003, we've helped shape the Prevent agenda. The Prevent agenda, let me tell you one thing. From my perspective and from the work we've done, it's the best thing since sliced bread. It hasn't been communicated effectively to the communities. The communities have lost trust in the government because we haven't demonstrated the effectiveness of it. Now, the government wants to do that only at a time when people have become so suspicious of Prevent, they don't trust it. So any organisation that's associated with government is no longer trustable by communities.
So really, your message is that there is great work we have done. There's a lot more great work we could do. We just need to empower the right people to go out there and do it. So basically, it's still a positive message, but one tinged with a bit of frustration, Hanif.
Of course. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind, and the team that I work with, the people I've met, police officers, security officers, civil servants even, that we can tackle and we can stop this problem. It lies with the risk averseness at a ministerial level and not allowing organisations like us across the country to get on with the damn job.
And one last little question for you. Who out there amongst the British-born Muslims, what type of person is the most vulnerable to being radicalised?
Everybody's vulnerable to being radicalised.
Wow. Hanif, thank you very much indeed for your call, and well done for all these years you've been doing your utmost to fight this horrible, horrible disease, and that's what I'm going to call it, because it is like a very nasty, unpleasant disease. And on Twitter, I get, we should act on intelligence before the killing, not after. Yeah, actually, the authorities tell us they have stopped 13 major terrorist attempts over the course of the last few years. And do you know what? For once, I do actually believe the authorities. Every person who's been to Syria and fighting for ISIS and returns to the UK should either be locked up or deported. End of. So I'm getting quite a lot of messages through like that. It should be a straight, heavy nicking for anyone that puts up anything to do with ISIS online, the same as it is for child abuse. Interesting, the internet has provoked a lot of response. Gareth in Liverpool, tell me, what do you think needs to happen?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I don't know. I've got a bit of a dog in this fight. My business partner's wife was stood feet away from the blast. She's currently in intensive care.
Oh, gosh.
So my feelings are running high at the moment. But the problem is there's an all too familiar pattern emerging with the perpetrator of this. It's come out, he follows the same religion as every other terrorist attack we have in this country. It's come out that, and they're saying the same, he was a lone wolf, he was this, that, the other. But the security services in this country constantly monitor 3,000 people. And every time there's a terrorist attack, it comes out they were on that list. They were known to the services. They're spending £9 billion a year to watch these 3,000 people, only for when one of them strikes to go, hey, we were watching them. Well, do something about them. We're going to need, it's extreme times. We need extreme measures. I've never known, not in the recent decades, known a terrorist attack to hit so close to home. The last one probably being, sadly, Manchester again, 1996.
In the Arndale Centre.
With the Arndale Centre.
Yeah. But Gareth, what are you suggesting? I mean, look, there are 3,500 people on this list that we've talked about. What do you really think? I mean, if you were sitting with Theresa May now, what would you recommend that she does with these 3,500 people?
Honestly?
Yeah.
Open a camp like Guantanamo Bay and throw them all in. They're all potential bombers. They've all got the potential to do this. So they should be straight away thrown in a camp or a prison or something where they can say, right, we need to monitor you. We need to find out what chances are you're going to do this. Because it's not just the 3,000. There's also the Inspire magazine. I'm sure you've heard of that.
I have, yeah.
Which is a terrorist manifesto, which tells people how to kill efficiently. 50,000 people in the UK downloaded that last year. So let's assume that all those 3,000 downloaded that. There's 50,000 potential lone wolves out there now.
Well, I'd be careful about that because we're exposed to all sorts of stuff on the internet without being changed. And Gareth, what you've said is very strong. You are not alone in saying it today. As I say, it worries me. It shades of a 1930s. That's the bit that gets me. But lastly, and most importantly, how is your business partner making? How's he getting through this? Wife in intensive care.
I haven't spoken to him. I know she was in theatre until lunchtime. She's got severe trauma, quote, life-changing injuries. So he's the information we've got is from.
Okay, well, we wish her well, Gareth, and we thank you for the call. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you. And we continue this conversation after the news, the dreadful news from Manchester.